So you heard me?
All right, so welcome everyone to the recording of assignment number two. This is Dr. Alford. My goal here is to just give you an overview of what my expectations are, and then hopefully to get some of you guys off the ledge, because I've received a number of emails of some angst about this particular assignment. So let's talk about what we're going to accomplish here. First and foremost, what we'll do is we'll look back in terms of the class, what got us to assignment number two. And then towards the end, I'll answer some questions. Now, this should be rather short, I'm thinking, because it's important for you to understand the way that I'm looking at the assignment and the way that I'm grading. And what that really means is that you'll see some things that I'm saying a little bit later in terms of there are no rights and wrongs, and I will put that in context. So what I'm saying is that no matter what you turn in, that is your approach. And the real key here is I've told some of the students, it's really not a matter if you're right or wrong. It's just a matter of will you have a job as a product manager in about 6 months. So some of you guys will be working for years. Some of you need to start looking. So let's take a look at what I'm describing here. So as we look back at the class, this is kind of like just the overview of when I kicked off the class of what we were, coming together to accomplish. And it's important for you to note that this is a 5-week class. And as a result of it being a 5-week class, it is an unrealistic expectation that you guys will be able to go through this entire case study and address every single aspect of forecasting and every single aspect of ROI development and things of that sort. Because in a typical sense, this is done over a period of an entire semester, and when I say a semester, probably about 15 weeks or so. So I want to make sure that everyone understands that the focus here is getting you guys to think quantitatively, but doing so within the framework of, let's say of the guidance provided in our book, in terms of the quant. So our first week here was really more the introduction to business analytics, and we talked a little bit about, does more data always equal better insight, and does it confuse or clarify? And that's when I kind of learned the personality of the class, because you guys had some very, very strong opinions on that. But all of your opinions were very, very much right on, because the reality here is data confusing or clarifying is really a matter of context. It's a matter of who's looking at the data. So we had some really good information and conversation there that got you guys talking about data and then starting to think about quantitative instead of qualitatively. Then we moved into framing the problem. And one of the challenges that some of you had was framing the problem, because many of you wanted to frame multiple problems. But what I explained to many of you that in the real world, the problem is not just a binary. It's either this or that. It's actually a collection of issues that represent all of the inputs of a particular problem. So many of you started to look at that and you said, okay, hey, when we're thinking about this metabocal case, wow, there is a problem there, but that problem is complex. It's not just what's the price. The problem is, are we looking at the packaging? Is it really all based off of the price of a package? Is it based off of the price per month? Is it based off of the price for the entire treatment to get someone to get that BMI down? So it's very complex. So it's great to see you guys evolve in understanding that not all problems can be framed with one sentence. Then we started to move to solving the problem. And one of the challenges that some of you had was that, when you started to frame the problem, you started using words, they should do this, or because of that, it was this. So the real opportunity we were trying to give you in this class was, okay, separate your framing from your solving. Because often if you try to solve during the same time that you're trying to frame, you're adding bias into it. And then you're not really focusing on that specific problem. You can only start to solve when you have the data to support that solution. Some of you looked at the data and you kind of wanted to go way beyond the data that was provided to help you solve. You said, hey, what about these variables or these 5 variables, or they didn't put this in or they didn't put that in? Well, this is a real world framing. And very, very often you're going to find that you will never, ever have all of the data that's required to make decision that you're 100% confident with. So one of the keys of this case is that when they design the case, pretty much all of the data that you need is there. However, it leaves you the opportunity to add your voice to that data, because what they're not saying is that, hey, the answer is this. What they're saying is all of the components are there, but it's really important for you to use your thinking, your research to put weight on that component. And when we start to talk about weight, some of you may weigh the BMI as more important than someone getting a doctor recommendation, or as more important than someone that is educated and they know that they need to lose weight. Some of you may look at those different variables that were presented in a case differently. But as we start to talk about weights, we're talking about how much do you think that that matters over another variable. And when you start adding all of those up, that gets into the modeling conversation that we had. And then the fun week was last week, where we started talking about communicating visually. And that's really where you guys really presented a lot of great visuals from the Wall Street Journal. They were all over the place, but what was interesting about each of them and each of your inputs there is that you've gone from thinking analytically and quantitatively to framing a problem to using data to solve the problem. But now you kind of ran into the issue that so many students and even my colleagues to this day run into, and that is, wow, we have some great data here, but how do we translate this data into something our audience can understand? And when you start to think of an audience, think of it as like a pyramid. The higher you are up in that organization, the less information they really need, meaning that you have to be much more concise there. What is your top bullet points? And then the lower you get in the organization, the more information they need. So one of the things that was interesting when we were talking about communicating visually is that the visualizations that you all presented, they were speaking to different audiences. And it was really great to see many of you select different visualizations because they spoke to you at your analytical level, meaning you understood and therefore you selected that one. But one of the things that's really, really important when you're thinking about visualizations, you have to keep in mind that you are not always the audience for that visualization. So as a result of that, sometimes you have to select a visualization that you probably personally don't like, but it certainly resonates with the audience that you're targeting. So I just want to lay that out there because I thought that was an interesting week, because you guys were transitioning to saying, hey, I now have the data, I understand the problem. How do we get the word out so that they can understand it? And when we make our recommendations, we're doing so in a very concise manner. And this week, where we are, is really now applying the analytics. So you have these visualizations, et cetera, kind of got a little ahead of ourselves because typically you apply the analytics, you do the forecasting, and now you're doing the visualizations based off of that. So looking back in the class, that's how we've gotten to where we are. So now we are at the point of assignment number 2. And one of the things that I feel for assignment number 2 is I don't think that this should be very difficult for this class. And the reason why I say that is that you guys have been so engaged from our week 1, week 2, 3, and 4, and even this week, I can see some early posts out there. But because of your engagement and because of the fact that you have really been trying to understand this particular class and understand how to frame, how to solve, and things of that sort, you should have already done a lot of the work for this particular assignment. So when we were talking about week number, let's say week number 2, and we started discussing framing, you were going through these questions as a result of what you were posting in the discussion, and then even what you posted in the learning journal. So as a result of that, I think you guys are much more ahead than you probably think. So as we think about that, what I wanted to resolve here is you guys can see what this is, the assignment is, it's a case study presentation. And what we're really looking for are your slides, that's a slide on framing, that you address these questions, a slide on demand, formulating the pricing strategy. What is your packaging recommendation? How do you forecast demand and how did you come up with that ROI? One of the things that I do, and one of the things that I encourage you guys to do, is challenge what we as professors have brought to you. So take a look at this slide here in number 5, where we say calculate the ROI for the metabolical drug. If the ROI achieved is less than 5%, what steps do you need to revisit? Well, you know what? That's kind of prescriptive for me, because you may find an ROI that's less than 5%. But if your strategy will give you a lifespan of that drug for 10 years, you're going to make your money back. So is 5% a bad thing, or is 5% a good thing? Someone may have an ROI of 180%. But if they're making that much money off of the drug, does that mean that the drug will persist in the market for very long? So what I'm saying is that I love analytics and I love these types of projects because your personalities, your voices, your biases, your perspectives, and all of those types of things should come out in your reports. And that's the reason why I'm not trying to be very prescriptive. So as we get through that, let's talk about what I'm really asking for. It really is 5 graded slides. Some of you have nothing to say. Some of you have a whole lot to say. Some of you have too much to say. What I will tell you, I am looking for 5 slides. Now, I want to point this out to you. This is business analytics. We are prepping you at JWMI for an executive level presentation as well as an executive level understanding of the problem and how you're going to present that problem. What that really means, and I can share this, about, let's say a month ago, I had an opportunity, because I'm in a global role at Microsoft. A month ago, I had an opportunity to get beat up and present to the person who is number 2 in our organization. And when you think of Microsoft, the scale of that is that if you look at an org chart, he has about 90,000 people in his org, okay? So as we started to discuss that, it took us weeks to figure out, of all of the data that we have available, what is the one slide we're going to present to show him where the business is going and then what we need to tweak. What I'm telling you, it's very, very important for you to not to use the opportunity for you to frame, solve, formulate, make recommendations, and then show your outputs. It's important for you to not do that with too much information and too many slides. You're going to lose your audience. One of the toughest things to do in grad school, because everybody wants to show and be able to present how knowledgeable you are, the toughest thing is for you to decide what to leave out. Because if it's not related to the problem, if it's external information, it may need to be in your appendix. I want you guys to challenge yourself to get this down to 5 graded slides. Solve the problem. When I say 5 graded, I understand you're going to have your slide to show your name, and you're probably going to have a slide to say the end or something. But the reality here is I want you to get very concise. Now, towards the bottom here, I have laid out sort of what those slides would look like. First slide, not a lot of data, just questions. Second slide, about the same. Third slide, you may have a little data, okay? But you need to not just put a PowerPoint that has a spreadsheet. It needs to have something explaining the context of what's there. And it doesn't need to be very detailed. It just needs to be very concise, okay? And then under making a recommendation, this is a money slide. This is your recommendation. And then applying analytics and forecast, this is a slide where you're showing a little bit more data. So it doesn't matter what that is. That's your story, okay? But I want you to understand the format of that. Now, as I move a little further, just some key guidance for assignment number 2. I want you to respond as if you are the product manager. I'm not asking you to be the CEO of the company or the investor. That's not what they ask you to do. They ask you to bring a product to market. Also, there are no immediate rights and wrongs, but there are future implications. Now, I've said this to a few of you. But when I say no immediate rights or wrongs, one of the great things about being a product manager is that you are the king of the island. You own the product. The sales team loves you. The company loves you because you're introducing some new flavors to the market, right? But there is no guarantee you're going to have a job in 6 months because it takes about that amount of time for you to get the product out there and then start getting results back of how are you doing. So when I say you are the product manager, what I am saying is that I'm not looking at if your PowerPoint is right or wrong because neither one of us will be in this class 6 months from now. What I am looking for is it concise? Does it look professional? And then finally, how have you addressed the problem? If you defined a problem early on, how have you carried that throughout? Okay, so no rights or wrongs. I want to take that pressure off of you. I just want you to think through the approach that you started, and I want to hold you to that towards the end. I will be grading you based off of your approach and using the framework. And of course, we all know that framework now. You're framing, you're solving, you're communicating in terms of visualizations. Your approach and priority on the key variables will be different from others. Some of you guys may not think that the BMI matters at all. Some of you may think it's biased. Some of you may think that there are variables that are missing. All of those things are very, very real. I want you to do the best with what you know and what you think you know. And I want you to understand this is a real world simulation because here's the thing. If each of you guys are product managers, that means that each of you could potentially be at different companies and you're trying to bring the same drug to the market. You're having to make the same types of decisions. This is a competitive situation, but from a product standpoint, it's not really competing against each other. It's competing in the market. So only the consumers who agree with your packaging, your pricing, etc., only they can define if you are good at what you've done or not. I'm just holding you to the approach that you've taken. All right, so here's the money slide, guys. Some of you are probably curious of how Dr. Alford solved this problem that our good friends over at Harvard gave us. I'm not going to go into all of the details there, but I did give you a money slide to show you what the actual solution is. So I put on my headphones and I said, okay, let me be the student here. I'm going to go through this. And because I know I always have one in the class, like, well, what's the answer? Okay. What I want you to understand in the real world, it's not about a test of what's the answer. It's about what is the outcome. So although I went through all this, and I'll go through real briefly here, although I went through all of this to help you guys understand how they would have recommended you solve the problem, the reality here is they're doing it based off of their assumptions. And what I tried to do is I put in yellow on here the assumptions that they made, and I tried to make a connection between how they forecasted demand, how they calculated the gross margin, what were the cost assumptions from a budgeting standpoint, from a fixed cost standpoint. And then finally, with all of that information above, what was the ROI analysis? The piece that I want you to focus on here, quite honestly, is in the cost assumptions in the budget. If you really do your due diligence, you will find this information at, well, let's say the gross margin and forecast. You'll find that information in the case. However, there were so many assumptions in there. Unless you're in my brain, you are not going to come up with the same numbers. You're not going to come up with the same weights. But what I wanted to at least share with you is how Harvard would have solved this particular problem. They came out with a 4-week, regimen, $150 retail, and that is my best. And I put my, in yellow, just so that I can bring home the point. You are not competing with Harvard. You're not competing with me. You made some assumptions at the beginning of the class that you've carried all the way through, and I encourage you to keep with that in spite of what I have here. I don't want you to look at this like, oh my gosh, this is going to be horrible or whatever. Or you may look at it, oh my gosh, Dr. Alford's not even close. That's all good. But it's really your voice, and that's the beauty of data, is that you can have two people sitting side by side with the same information. They can come up with the same content, or they can come up with the same data. But once you have areas where you need to have your own voice, that's really where the value comes out. And the only way you will know, get it out to market, and then you'll see what happens next. Last two slides here. That's all, folks. Okay, Looney Tunes, and the clock is ticking. This is due Sunday at midnight. No exceptions at all. You should not stress about this, because whatever you started with is whatever you're going to roll with. And that's really what I'm going to grade, not on how close are you to this slide, but really how close are you to what you started out with. So there's some support for you in this particular class. You have your writing coach, but I don't think you need that for your PowerPoint. And that's pretty much all that I have, guys. So at this point, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you guys very much.